Hey, have you ever wondered how to create some rusty aging effects for your shaders? In this tutorial we will focus about how we can use procedural approaches to automatically generate rust or other aging effects on our surfaces. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Alright, so here on the left hand side we have a reference that I found online, and that's something I would always recommend to do, is to try to find a reference of the shader that you try to build. So this one here I liked in particular because you have two very distinctive materials. So one is this greenish metallic coating material and the other one is this rusty material here, and then we have to recreate both of those materials and then combine them together with a mask, and then that's basically the result that I got with this kind of technique. So you can see here this one looks kind of comparable to the reference that I found here. So basically the breakdown would be like this. So first one would be to create this greenish metallic material. The next part would be to create this rusty material here. And then the third part would be to generate a procedural mask. So this mask is done procedurally. And by procedurally, I mean not that I don't use any textures. By procedure, I mean that I define like procedurally where those textures are placed. So this has certain kind of advantages that I will show in a second. So once this mask is created, then I can use it to feed a shader, which will then combine both materials together and achieve our final result. So what is the advantage of those procedural masks? You can see it right here. I have 4 totally identical teapots. They all are exactly the same, but when I render them, they all look unique. So all of them have unique kind of rust patterns. They're not repeating. So that's one advantage. And the other advantage is, for example, if I show like those interesting sci-fi models here, they don't have any UV maps, anything like this. It's just raw geometry, and I can just apply my shading setup here and everything immediately looks much more interesting. Everything immediately has rust on places where you would expect the rust to be. So you just need to define the base rules of your shader, and then everything else would be done by VRay itself. So what I can't cover in this tutorial is the whole studio lighting setup here. I have my own tutorial about this that you should check out, because that's the base for for many of my upcoming tutorials. You can find it in my channel. The other thing that I can't cover is like how to make those 2 base materials in this YouTube version, because it would just make the tutorial way too long. So I have on Patreon another tutorial about how to create like those 2 materials. So if that has any value for you, you can check it out on the Patreon page. Additionally, you can find there all the scenes, all the resources for all my tutorials to download and try out by yourself. Alright, so now we're just gonna start working on our mask. So what I set up here already is that I have a VRayBlendMtl, and then as a base material in here, I have this VRayLight material with the pure black color. So all of those steps are to just pre-visualize our mask. So it's much easier to see what actually will be masked. I think it's easier to build a very simple shader to pre-visualize it. That's what I'm doing now. So I have this black base material here, then I have this VRayLight material with a white color inside here. And then I will add this one here into my code 1. And now both of those materials will be blended together. And at the moment, it will be defined by whatever color value is set here. So here it's because the color value is 128. That means both of them will be half blended together. And the result will be this gray result here. But the way we want to do it is to use a mask. So I will add a new composite map in here. And then as soon as I add my first layer in here, which will be a VRay color, then this one here will be used instead. And now I will just put it to black. That means at the moment we use 100% this shader here and not this shader. And now inside my composite map, I will start to layer up all the different parts of the model that I want to mask. And like this way, we will generate our final mask. So in order to make some rust appear, we would need to make some parts of this mask become white. And that's what we're gonna do now. So I create a new layer, create a new VRay color in here, and then set this part here to white. And now, of course, everything is white. That means everywhere would be rust, and that's not what we want. So we need to smartly determine where this white elements would be added. So the easiest way to do that would be to use a VRayDirt node. And this one is an ambient occlusion. and it works like this. You have a radius and you have an occluded and unoccluded color, and then it will search in a radius of this many centimeters, in this case, for example, 10, and then all the occluded color would become black, all the unoccluded color would become white. So since we want to use this as a mask, we would need to switch those two colors here. So let's swap them, and now you can easier see what's happening. So at the moment you can see the radius is 10, so that's too big. And if I make it smaller, for example, like 1, you can see that he will now start to mask like the smaller creases, the smaller parts. And those are definitely parts where rust would accumulate. So we can find some value here that we think looks nice. And then with this distribution value here, you can increase the contrast. So if you go lower, in this case, it would increase the contrast. So for example, if we go -25, and we have really strong contrast, and with this, you can really start to like draw some mask somewhere where you want it. And for rust, this occlusion nodes is something really useful. So let's leave it at 1 for now. And the problem that we're facing at the moment is that we have now a mask for those creases, but this mask is extremely uniform. That's not really how rust would accumulate, and it would look a little bit computer generated. So we need to hide this kind of perfect masking. And the way to do that is that we can map something into our radius here. So at the moment, the radius is just controlled by this one numeric value in here, but we can actually put color maps, or we can actually put masks in here. So I have this mask here, for example, which looks like this. So it's just a gray or a black and white mask basically. And then this one I will map into my radius parameter in here. And then you can see what's happening now is that this radius will be controlled by this mask. So I can then, for example, if I want to change now the size of this, I could add a VRayTriplanarTex texture, and then I mask this into here and here, and then put this here in between, define like a random texture offset, and then choose a different size. So for example, at the moment the size is 1, that's tiny small. Let's find, for example, like 25 or like 50. I think 25 is fine. Yeah, and then you can see that now we have a much more organic looking mask appearing here, which looks much more natural. So I can also make the blur value here go extremely low, and then this way my mask will stay crisp and clear. Okay, so now this one would be the first part, but we're not finished yet. We can layer many more stuff on top of each other. Alright, so now I reorganize the stuff a little bit so that it's a little bit easier to understand. This one is our first layer, this one here is our second layer, and now I want to add a third layer. And what I want to do now is that I like the look so far already, but for me the problem is that we have these like masks here appearing in the creases and crevices, but it's quite uniform still. So I want some of the parts to be gone and some of the parts to reappear, right? So that not everywhere in every crease they have this dirt, or this rust, but only in some of them. So the easiest way to do that would be to add a new material here, or a new VRay color here. And then by removing stuff, we need to switch this color here to black again. Let's put this one down here. So now I need to mask this black layer. I need to mask that over the existing layer. So I have this texture right here. So this texture here. You can see it has some parts masked out, and then I will use this one here as a mask. So let me just apply this one in here. And now you can see some of the stuff is now being masked away. Let me just put this under here. Some of the stuff is basically now masked away, but I want to have a little bit more control of this. So I will add this VRayTriplanarTex texture in here, add this one as a texture, and then put this one here into the mask. And also choose a random texture offset. And then here, for example, I can choose a scale of 50 or a scale of 75 or 100 even. And now you can see some stuff is like disappearing, and in some parts it's still remaining. I think 100 is probably too big. Let's leave it at like maybe 75. We can also choose, for example, to invert this map, so then it would be removed everywhere here and only this part here would remain. Or you could add like a color ramp to it, which in this case doesn't have so much effect because it's already quite contrastly mapped. So we just leave it at this one here. And now we will take care of the next part. So I will add another layer in here. And now the next part would be that we have now rust appearing in our like creases, but I want to have them also appearing on the edges. So some edges where the metal would be, for example, bumped by some other parts. After a while, the paint would be removed and then the rust would start to build up in there. So that's the next layer that I will build. So that we don't get confused by the stuff that we already built, let's just put this one here to 0 and then this one also to 0. So now we only have this base layer and the new layer that we're building. And then we can start to add a new V-Ray color in here, which also is going to be white. So this color here will also be set to white. And then I will add a VRayDirt node in here. Very similar to what we did before for this part here. But this time we will change it a little bit. So now let's switch both of them again here so that we're still masking like the occluded parts. But you can choose a different mode in here. So this mode, for example, is set at the moment to ambient occlusion, but I want to have the inner occlusion. That means it will flip the normals of the model and then calculate the inner occlusion. So the result will be, like this. You don't see much because the radius is way too big, because now it's basically flipped the model and then inside everything is included. So let's just put a very small number, for example, like 1 or 4 or 0.4 or 0.5 or something. And what you can see is that now it will start to mask out my the edges of my model. So I think I will go with 1 here. And then I feel I want to have a little bit more contrast. So the easiest way to do that would be to just add a V-Ray color in here. And then set this color here to white. And now we're back to where we were before, but I want to have more contrast. So there's this RGB multiplier. And you can, for example, increase this multiplier. No, what happened now? Okay, you can increase the multiplier to a higher value. So before it was 1. And the higher you go with the multiplier, the more contrasty the result will be. So for example, I will put it at 10. And once you did that, it's important to add an output node in here. So output. And then add this basically in front of my VRayDirt. And then in this output node, there's basically only one option that I want to use, and that's this clamp option here. So if I clamp this one, that means I won't get higher values than 1. And then I can connect this here to my layer 4 again. And now we are making sure that there's no weird values appearing in our mask. Okay, so now we have our mask set up, but let's still find a different radius in here. So I will take another texture node, apply this in here. Whoops, what happened now? Take this texture node basically, and then connect this in my radius. So that's the radius in here. Now you can see that I have a much more interesting mask appearing here on the side, right? So I could define it further with a VRayDirt, with a VRayTriplanar texture. Where's this dirt? Let me get rid of that here. So a VRayTriplanar texture. put this one here into this texture node here, and then this one into the radius. And then also choose a different texture offset, and for example here different scaling, so like 50 or 75, 50 maybe. Yeah, now it's all about like trying to find the right value. So what I want is that those parts here, they should look like pretty scratched because they show out a little bit. So now I have to find the right radius for this. So if I go higher with the radius, you can see it's already starting to mask them out. And for example, if I go to a radius of 4, then yeah, all of those parts would be masked out. I think 4 is a little bit too high. I think something like this should be nice. So we have now on all the edges, we have like these kind of bump effects or this kind of like rust effects going on. And then we can bring back the other stuff that we had before. So that's those two things here. And then we have already a mask that looks kind of interesting. So next step would be to just take care of those empty parts here where our occlusion nodes or VRayDirt nodes don't have any effect. So let's just try to focus about these parts now. So for this last part, I will add a new layer in here. I will create a new VRay color, move it down to here. So the VRay color should be white because we want to add something to our existing mask. And then just again, to not be confused with any of the other stuff, let's put all of this stuff here to 0. And then I will add a new texture. So I will have this texture here, which will look like this scratched texture here. I will add a new VRayTriplanar texture, connect it again like before, make sure that there's a random texture offset, and then I will map this one here into our mask. So this one go to the mask. And then now the radius is way too small. So I will make sure that the radius is something higher. For example, 75, 100. So that we get these kind of like random scratched off parts, which is very hard to get with a standard occlusion map because they will always look a little bit generic. So we use these standard occlusion maps for the edges, and then for the parts in the model, we will use something more realistic, like these scratches basically, which come from the texture. So then once we have all of those applied to each other, or all of those in place, we will bring back all of this here. And then we have some final mask that we're now going to use for the masking of our rust materials. So this one now is the final step of how we bring everything together again. I switched the view again, and we have our 3 different shaders or materials right here. And we'll create now a new VRayBlendMtl. And then we need to feed it with the correct material. So this one here would be our base material. And then this one here would be our rust material. And then the mask we will take from here. So I will check this mask here. Take this mask. And then before I put it inside, I want to put an output node in here, just to make sure that there's no operation happening inside which will give us values higher than 1 or below 0. Then we might enter some problems. So I always add this output node in front of here, also called output mask. And then inside here, I will make a color correction. Just leave everything at how it is at the moment, and then just copy this mask here. So I just copy the whole mask, and I will just put it inside here as an instance. And then I will apply this shader here to our shading dummy. And now we can see already that, yeah, the mask is being applied correctly. And now with this color correction in here, call it mask color correction, we can define basically, or we can make some adjustments on the map. So we can make this map more contrasty, more strong. make some really high values, and you can see that we have much more dust appearing now in here. We can also reduce the contrast, reduce the intensity, and so on. So I think I would just, for example, put this one here to 200, and then this one here to a value of 2, for example. And then I think, yeah, this amount of rust looks kind of believable to me. And now the only thing that I want to change is the bump. So I can now see that, yeah, we have some rust appearing here. It's basically blending between those two shaders. But what we don't have is that there should be like an edge around this, right? Because this one in here is basically deeper than the base material that we have here, because it's being scratched inside. And the easiest way to do that is to use a VRayBumpMaterial. So I will add this on top of here. So this one here is our blend material. And then we will add a new VRayBumpMaterial. We will keep the old material as a submaterial. And by default, nothing happens first. That's fine, because now we need to add a bump map. And the way that this material works is that it will just add an additional bump map on top of whatever is piped under here, right? So we don't need to go in to those materials here again and change the bump map right there. We can just later on add it on top of everything. So first thing I would do is to change this bump amount value to a value of 100. I think by default it's set to 30 for whatever reason. But 100 for me makes more sense, and that you will see in a second. Why? Because first of all, now I would just like to take this mask here and then, for example, pipe it into this bump map. So the mask that we generated, pipe inside here. And unfortunately, this one doesn't work. So if I see, I just put the whole composite map inside. I try to see if there's some changes, but actually, if I clear it out, it looks pretty much identical. And the reason for that is that VRay will have a hard time to really convert all of this composite map into a bump map that it can understand. So you need to convert it first into something like this. So there's a special node for that, and this is called VRay color to bump. And then you can put any color map or any composite map, in our case, inside here, and it would then be converted to something that VRay can read. So let's now first here create a new, for example, composite map. And then we will recreate some parts of our map here. We'll recreate this and we will instance that. That's so that no matter where we change it, will also be changed accordingly for the bump. So I copy this part here that was a scratch layer, and then I paste this as an instance inside here. And now you will be able to see that something is happening, because he's now correctly converting all of this color information to something that it can read as a bump map. But yeah, it looks like it's upside down. So here this height parameter comes into place. And that's why I have this bump amount here set to 100, because if it's not set to 100, then this value here will be multiplied again by this. So for example, I want that in this case, the highest amount of bump should be negative 0.1 centimeters. So that means it will go like 0.1 centimeters, so 1 millimeter will go inside. So if I set this here, then you will see that now the scratches are creating this kind of effect, that they look like if they have been like really scratched inside. So then you could go inside here and add more elements from this one here. But for now, I will leave it at this because the procedure is basically the same. So you could, for example, also, oops, this one is set to normal, take like some stuff from the occlusion masks here, so that you will also get a bump for these kind of parts. But yeah, I decided to only have these bump parts for those very heavy scratches, and all of those ones, they won't get like an extra outline. All right, so this one now concludes our final result. So I will make it a little bit bigger and that we can see how it's rendering. And then at the same time, I will tell you, you can find all of those scene files if you're interested on my Patreon page. There you can find any scene file from any of the tutorials I'm doing. You can find my whole studio lighting setup there. You can download everything. You can test everything out by yourself if that has any additional value for you. And until then, I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Take care and see you soon.